Vince. It's really wonderful to see you.
Very good to be here. Yeah, thank you.
I know I didn't prep you much on like what we're going to talk about or what this is all about, but I know you have a little sense of the podcast and what it is. And I
Yeah,
felt called to talk to you because when we met, one, I just enjoyed meeting you. I loved our conversations. I just being in your presence was lovely.
that's really nice to say. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. And then I noticed on Instagram that you are a breathwork therapist. You're utilizing breathwork both for yourself as well as for clients. And that pinged me again to, ooh, I think he and I could have a really interesting and juicy conversation on the pod. So welcome, and let's dive into to things. How are you, first and foremost? What's going
I'm
on?
good. Yeah, really good. I am in New York. The weather's good. I've just got back from some travels, so I'm readjusting to Brooklyn. But yeah, overall things are very good. Yeah,
Were you in like totally different types of environments than
very different.
city?
I was in Indonesia for a few weeks.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
it was my birthday recently, and went on a surf trip with some friends. Something we've talked about for years. It's been quite a few years since we did it, so it was a good excuse to take the plunge and get everyone together. Yeah. So
Awesome. Well, happy
um,
belated birthday. That sounds like a
thank you.
beautiful way to celebrate it.
It was good. Yeah, it was good. Um, just
When's
nice
your
to change
birthday?
up your
Because I just had
environment.
one too.
It was in May, middle of May.
Okay, mine's end of May.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good time of year, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And what a great time to go and do a little surf, be with friends. Now you live in New York most of the time, though, most of the year.
Yes. Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah. New York's been home for 12 years or over 10 years now. Yeah. So it's a love hate with New York. It's amazing when it's amazing, and it will beat you relentlessly when it's not. But you keep coming back.
yeah. Now, did you originally go there for work for modeling?
Originally came here for work. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, as I say, about 12 years ago.
Hmm.
Never with any sort of intention of I'm moving there permanently, but it just sort of happened that way. That one day I realized I'm living here now, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's been
Oh, yeah.
good. I've lived multiple lives in New York, so
Mhm.
um, yeah, just I keep finding new spaces in the city and kind of
That's
new
what,
ways of
is so
being, I suppose.
magical about the density and the creativity of cities like New York, that
Mm.
yes, they can be so heavy and so much, but it is that way because there's so much going on, so much
So much,
to
and
dig
there's just
into.
there's an energy here that, I mean, everyone talks about it. It's the cliche of the sort of New York, but there really is. You feel part of something in a way that I haven't felt anywhere else. In that you sort of walk out your door and there's life happening in a million different ways, and you just have no idea what you're going to encounter. Like, I think as someone said to me a long time ago, and I've always remembered it, is that New York will give back exactly what you put into it. So
Mm,
if you're here and you sort of stay out of things and you're removed, it's going to be quite a tough experience, and going to feel quite lonely. But if you put energy into it in whatever form, if you make an effort, it will reflect that right back at you. And I've definitely found that to be true. That there's just this sort of energetic thing here that rewards diving in, I suppose.
hmm. Yeah, I don't know how you, with that many people in one area, one dense area
Hmm.
like that, how you could not be impacted by the energy, whether negatively or positively or
Yeah,
whatever.
it
I
can
mean,
go both ways.
yes, yeah. So
Yeah.
sum up the lives that you've had there. What were your versions of Vince in New York?
Well, as you mentioned, I came here to model. So that was the sort of first few years were very nomadic, I suppose. I was traveling a lot. I was bouncing between different apartments. I was very new to the city, still hadn't planned to live here, just sort of became home. And then I ended up moving in with a friend, and we really set up like this amazing life where we were traveling a lot, and we were living in a kind of more quiet, chill part of town, and it was just a much more stable kind of way of being here. And then I suppose post that, I was in a relationship for many years, and that was a whole chapter on its own. And then that relationship ended, and which is partly the kind of brought me into some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, I suppose, the breath work and some of this journey. And so this chapter now is a sort of new one in a way. It's feeling very at home in New York, but in a different way to what I have before, I think. And it's finding new spaces here and connecting with new people, and that's been really interesting.
I
Yeah,
love it. Reinvention.
in a big way.
Reinvention,
Yeah,
for those listening who don't live in a big dynamic, megalopolis like New York City, this type of reflection and reinvention can happen anywhere, right? I think New
for
York
sure.
forces it on you to some degree.
Yeah.
Some places will really like just like drive you into that type of lifestyle of like you have to respond. Whereas if you live in a more placid place, you're not necessarily provoked in the same way to respond to it, but the opportunity to do that is
Mm,
everywhere. That is life, right?
mm. Yeah, I think New York can be brutal if you don't adjust to it. It's a particular. It was strange. As I mentioned, I went through quite a sort of hard breakup, and this relationship was sort of my whole life for a long period, and left New York post that. And at no point did I not think I was going to come back. And so many people said to me, like, why are you going back to New York? Why there's so much stuff to work through. And it was interesting. It just always called me back. I just knew that this was where home was. And I think part of that is knowing that there's sort of energetic stuff there that needs to be worked through. I think there was
Mhm,
always a sense of like leaving in the way I did temporarily and kind of getting out of it because I needed to sort of find some space.
mhm.
I didn't want to leave on those terms, and
Yeah.
that coming back, it's really kind of sitting with all the debris that I need to work through personally, the sort of energy of it, and my own personal stuff. And it's such a beautiful place to do that because it confronts you in so many ways, all day, every day, with there's just so many people, and the fact that you're part of something so big and can so often feel out of it. And it's a very lonely city, New York, in many ways,
Mhm.
ironically, because you there's so much happening around you that if you're not engaged with it, or if you don't feel part of it, or you can feel almost more removed. Whereas in
Yeah.
quieter sort of places, there's not as much of that sense. You can sit on your own and be quiet, and you don't feel like you're missing out. Whereas New York, there's this constantly confronts you with how amazing everyone else has it and how everyone else is so busy and social and popular. So
It's
if you're not in that environment, it can be a real feeling of kind of loneliness here. And everyone I speak to who's come here and lived here has gone through that or goes through periods of that, of just feeling
Mhm.
really detached from it, particularly because you walk down the street and there's millions of people and you feel this sense of disconnection. And I think part of what I find so amazing is using that as a way to kind of reconnect in a way of like realizing that you are part of something and not and really noticing that detachment, I suppose, and sort of questioning it and seeing what personally is in me that's making me feel that way and what I need to work with to get
Mhm.
beyond that. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, there's so many lessons here. It's a
so
great teacher.
many. It's so funny, like what you're describing. It's like social media FOMO, but in real life.
In real
You
life,
know, because
constantly. Yeah, yeah,
people feel that, on social media where they're like, oh, look at all how amazing, these people's lives are and what they're doing. And if you feel that way, in the reflection of real people,
yeah,
IRL, as you walk around New York City, it's probably that original FOMO that people,
yeah.
um,
I think on the flip side of that is New York is an incredibly welcoming, open place. I think there are places where people are a bit more standoffish, and I think New York can feel intimidating. But if you put yourself out, as I've said, people are like you can form new communities and connections and
yeah.
friendships and so quickly here, and if you're in the right space in your life, or if you're kind of looking to build or experience new things or start something new, it's a place where you can do that very quickly.
Hmm.
And that's what's incredible. Like, your life really can change very rapidly here. You can go out in the morning with no expectations and meet someone who talks about something, and you end up there in the afternoon, and by the next morning you have a whole new sort of chapter of your life. It's been really interesting, and
Yeah.
that stuff really does happen here. It's sort of like a movie scene sometimes.
I was just talking about this with my husband this morning about how the flip side of this, like in a corporate
Mm,
environment where you're in corporate walls, where you go to the same office and you see the same people every day. That's not just true of corporate, but that's the sort of typical environment that
yeah.
you would have that type of experience where you are literally with the same people in the same walls. And take you out of New York City, let's say you're like in a small state, or and that's your life and you are in that environment, there isn't that same level of opportunity for serendipity and
Mm,
for spirit to kind of come in. And
mm,
unless, yeah, I mean, I think that honestly, anyone could be a messenger or an angel for you, or deliver something that you need, even if it's someone you've been sitting next to for 7 years in the cubicle, and all of a sudden they say something, you're like, whoa, okay, that was a message from the divine. But in a place like New York, or a place that's more vibrant, in a place where you are naturally just bombarded and interacting with different energies all the time, there's just that much more opportunity for that to
yeah,
happen.
there's a lot to play with here for sure.
Totally. And I
Yeah.
love what you said about, it's an opportunity too to get to see, what is it in me that is resisting this, or what is it in
Mm,
me that is being triggered by this? I mean, you have so much opportunity to actually
mm,
self-reflect amidst all of those people. So that's another thing. Mm, I'm not saying it's a misnomer, because you can absolutely go into silent meditation and go in a cave, or go, away on a retreat and do that reflection also. But what I find interesting about life is to be able to take that back into
yeah.
dense places, highly populated places, places that aren't just like the beautiful Tulum retreat space where, and now you're in it. Now you're in
Yeah.
the midst of this. How can you use that to reflect? How can you also transcend that to get into a place of peace and a place of
Yeah,
calm?
it's something I've been sitting with a lot lately. Is that I think I've spent a lot of my life really lost in the sort of detail of it all, in the kind of drama at a sort of very personal scale, very like selfish in my own shit. And then I've had periods where I've gone way the other way, where I've got into the sort of spirituality of it all, and like, well, it's all doesn't mean anything anyway, and we can just sort of meditate above it. And I think I've reached this really beautiful place. I've sort of had some quite amazing realizations over the last while of, actually, as exactly what you said, the juice of it is that middle ground of like not allowing yourself to dive too deep into it, and not sitting above it, and that those are the same thing. I think there's so many people who get into these sort of spiritual mindsets where they think the goal is to get above everything and to be detached to a point where you are not lost in the sort of drama, and that there's a disconnection. um and actually, it's the beauty is really experiencing life and diving into it, and all the sort of pain and the pleasure and the day-to-day stuff and the boring stuff, um and trying to kind of surf that middle ground. And I think that's
Mhm.
what gets really interesting, of trying to like maintain that balance. And when you're in that state, that's the sort of flow state of you're aware that there's all your shit, and you're aware that it doesn't really mean anything, but
Yes.
you're in life, you're in the reality of it, from that state. And I think that's a really interesting thing to, I kind of sit to that quite a lot. And it's not always obvious, but when I catch myself getting lost either way, I sort of, there's recentering, I suppose.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so true that those who have, and you meet them often in the spiritual communities that you pass, as you explore, I would say,
Yeah.
exploring the spiritual path, from a moment of awakening is a journey we're all on that journey anyway, but it's the realization of the journey, and then the meeting of the characters along the
Mm,
way. And
mm,
absolutely have met, countless people who are stuck on that side of the same spectrum, right?
mm.
They're on that, in that place of, that's their identity.
Yeah.
They've
Which is
identified,
when you kind of realize that it's the same. If you're
right?
completely unaware and stuck in like your selfish sort of needs and desires and all the drama of life, or you're sort of think you're above it all and all you do is sit in a cave and meditate, it essentially you're playing the same game because you're missing out on the kind of juice of all the lessons and all the stuff that is in front of you, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that was a
Yeah.
huge realization for me of being careful of. There's a point, maybe points I've got to where I was like, I'm better than all, I'm sort of, I know more, and I'm I have all this sort of realizations, and realizing actually at that point I'm detached from the day-to-day reality and actually confronting what's in front of me in the same way as I was before I had any of those realizations, and I was lost in my anxiety and sort of worries and personal problems. And so,
Totally.
yeah.
I had a guest on, who's, and she speaks very openly about this. She wrote a book about it, so I'm not revealing anything that, personal to her that she hasn't shared already. But her husband committed suicide, and he was a person that she connected with, on, on a spiritual level. He was a deep meditator. He was what appeared outwardly highly successful. And what he was doing was hiding in his spirituality.
Mm,
He was hiding out in his
mm,
meditation. So he used it as a means to feel okay about the world of his earthly being crumbling, and him not
mm,
understanding and knowing how to deal with that, not understanding how to know it, to how to bring that back to the center that you were talking about. He was
yeah,
incapable, well, not incapable, but he felt incapable of doing that. So he would go
yeah,
off and meditate and go off into that spiritual realm to escape. And then he
yeah,
did essentially what she calls the final escape, was to leave this earthly plane because he couldn't handle it. And I think if we choose to come down here and deal with this earthly plane, we're choosing it all. Like you said, the joy, the pain, the love, the sorrow, the the hard stuff, and the really fun, amazing light stuff. We're choosing to have that
yeah. I think
experience.
it's you can kind of reach those peak states, but be aware that they're peak states, and you always come down again, and it's trying to bring that back into everyday life, and really it's the boring shit because you wake up in the morning and you still have the problems to confront, and it's still very like, no matter what your sort of spiritual belief or what your thought is on how this is all an illusion or not or whatever it may be, it's still very real. And the
Right.
ground is hard and the pain is painful, and kind of being able to sit in that and be aware of how beautiful it is that you get to experience that and use it, and even at its worst, is definitely something I have. It's been a journey and a constant practice to kind of constantly recenter to that.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think tools, and that's where I kind of ended up with the breath work, which I suppose is how you kind of connected in terms of the podcast. Yeah, that's been such a major tool for me,
Mm.
that kind of brought a level of awareness that I think I didn't have before.
How did you get
Um,
started with it?
well, yeah, as I mentioned, I sort of, I think a huge turning point in my life was this breakup that I went through. It was such a it was I've always been curious and explored a lot of sort of, I suppose, the full range from the kind of cheesiest self help to the sort of spirituality. And there's been points in my life where I kind of thought I got it to a degree, and um, but I don't think I ever really got it.
Mm.
And towards the end of the relationship, and I suppose largely what contributed to it ending, was I was in such a self-involved, anxious state. I was so lost in sort of my problems, or the perceived problems. And I think I just wasn't very present in what was happening, and obviously it wasn't present in relationship, um, and I was very aware that I wasn't where I wanted to be, who I wanted to be, and how I wanted to be, kind of responding to things. And, but the tool I was using to try and solve that was my mind. I've always been someone who was very in their head and kind of really thought that the intellect will solve it all. And I accessed all of that stuff, no matter how spiritual it got or how self-helpy it got, was always through my head of just like, I need to understand it and need to make sense. And I think that led to me being quite, I look back at versions of myself with sort of a lot of, maybe shame is the wrong word, but definitely kind of a lot of cringe. And I think I think at how sort of arrogant I was, because I thought I knew better, and I was definitely good at lecturing people on sort of, you should be looking at this, but I never actually looked at myself in the same way. And I think the breakup knocked me so hard that I wasn't able to look away, and I wasn't able to run from it. I was in such pain, and I think both the fact that I wasn't able to look away and the fact that I realized that this was beyond just someone breaking up with me, that there was stuff there that I needed to examine. And if I didn't do it now, it wasn't going to happen. If I couldn't do it from that space of just really hitting the bottom and being in kind of, I mean, like some dark times. And I mean, anyone who's been through a painful heartbreak, I think they can relate. There's not many things that hit you in quite the same way, because it brings up, definitely for me, it brought up so many personal emotions of just the abandonment, and this, it was this feeling of, you sort of have this hunch that maybe you're not quite good enough, and you're not this part, maybe you're not lovable, and you're not, but then you have this person in your life who's like, no, you are, and you're like, oh, I'm imagining it, I am good. And then that person who knows you the best turns around and goes, no, actually you're right, like you're not good enough, and I'm out. And then your ego latches onto that and goes, oh, it's all true, I am all those things I thought about myself are all true. I've just been proven. That's not what's happening at all, but that's how your mind attaches to it, and you go through
spins
this
out of control.
Yeah, and it latches onto it, and the sort of self-pity and all of that stuff, which I think everyone goes through. It's really interesting, and in hindsight, really beautiful, because it's someone, I heard it somewhere, of just like at the low points in like real suffering, the veil is thinner. Like there's a connection to something larger than yourself that it's very hard to access when life is good. Like when reality is good, it's great to hang around in it. When it's not, there's the sort of veil to whatever you may call it, the divine or something larger, is thinner. And I think even at my lowest points, I had that awareness of like this, I'm connecting to something deeper here. And that's a really amazing thing. There's real beauty in the pain, I suppose. And that led me on a journey, I wish I could say sort of out of choice, but it was purely out of need, of just like really digging in and going in all sorts. I mean, I was anything to end the pain, I suppose. I was clawing at it, and all the podcasts and this and the spirituality, just every modality or this, like I was really exploring. And I think the point I finally got to was having some experiences where I profoundly realized how getting out of my head was the solution. And all of the stuff was just adding more information, and it was fueling my mind, which was the thing that was causing all the suffering in the first place. It was all the projections of who I thought I was, who I thought I should be, who I thought I wasn't good enough, or who she was, and sort of, it was all just these sort of illusions that I was creating. And there was sort of these awarenesses of like, actually I was quite there was a comfort in that victim mentality. There was a safe space in there, and it was very scary to get out of that, because who was
Yeah.
I if I'm not this sort of hard done by person? And the thing that really shifted things was just, as I say, some experiences that profoundly got me into my body. Just showed me that when I let go of my thinking mind and shift into my body, there's a whole different level of kind of awareness that opens up, and there's a connection that your mind just can't make, and that there's sort of a peace and a presence and a joy in that.
Hmm.
And I think that was the sort of crack in the door that I've been on ever since.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't want to overemphasize it. It's a constant practice, and the,
Right.
the hard days are still there, and it's not. There's no magical thing. As we talked about, we still live very much in reality, and reality is hard and tricky and just suffering in all sorts of ways. But
Yeah.
I just find whenever I come back into my body, there's a sense of space that is not there when I try and use my mind to solve these things. Um,
Hmm.
and that led me to the breathwork, which was I kind of started playing with things, and breathwork something I've done many years ago and had some really amazing experiences with it, but I wasn't something that I sort of needed in the same way. I suppose I wasn't in the right space to receive what it actually was, and then ended up diving into it. And my first session, I was first session on my own where I just kind of really went deep. I just released so much stuff that I didn't even know was there. Just I like within minutes, I was in like bawling and just so much emotion coming out. And I
Oh.
was doing very deep breathwork sessions for days, like day back to back to back for a while. And consistently, I was just clearing through the stuff. I could feel stuff coming out, and it was
Mhm.
for the first time, it was stuff coming out that I didn't feel the need to define. Oh, I couldn't really define. I mean, it was just whether it was childhood stuff or whether it was recent stuff, it wasn't really relevant. It was like massaging a knot is how I like to explain it. It's like there's a knot there and you massage it out, and once it's released, and new knots come in and stuff tenses up. But
Right.
there's like old deep kind of ones that you really got to spend some time on. Sometimes they can take a bit of coaxing, but when they're out, there's a sense of like openness that you get. And I got to a point after, I don't know, weeks of doing this quite consistently, going quite deep, that I remember having this session where like nothing came up. Oh, not in the same way. There's still very profound experiences through breathwork, but it's not. There wasn't that like emotional clearing. It was sort of the early days where within 30 seconds I'm just shuddering with sort of tears, and then it sort of took 5 minutes to get there, and then eventually I'd 30 minutes in, and I'm like, oh, that was just a really beautiful experience. But I sort of let go of so much, and I think that
Yeah.
was when I just realized, like, wait, this is so powerful. And that took me on a journey deeper into sort of studying and learning a lot more, and getting sort of certified in various ways, and then working with friends, and then doing classes, and just some really profound experiences. The more I dived into it, the more I just saw how powerful it was. And it's such a
Yeah.
simple thing. I always have to catch myself as well, because I start doubting it. I'm like, is this really, we're just breathing here? And then I see how it affects people. One of the first kind of group sessions I did with people I didn't know, um, someone
Yeah, that's when you get
went,
to really put it to the test, right? It's not
yeah,
just your
because you doubt
friend.
yourself as well. You're like,
Yeah.
well, this has worked for me, but it's so
Yeah.
simple. Like, is it? And the someone in that group, he had never done anything like that. And I got a message afterwards saying it was the most profound thing he'd done in like 45 years of life. And he went into some very dark childhood stuff that was just sitting there. And he was on the floor, and he was like a guy, not tough guy, but like he wasn't someone he wasn't sort of spiritual or woo woo or anything. He'd never dived into anything like that. And he was on the floor in a ball for like 30 minutes afterwards, just weeping and
Yeah.
just unlocked. And it was so powerful to see that. And I think what I love about this stuff so much is someone like that I'd said 3 words to before going into the session. And afterwards, suddenly he was opening up to me about his like deepest, darkest stuff that that he tapped into, and suddenly you have this connection with someone in that space
Mhm.
that is so deep and profound. And I consistently seem to have that, like when you have these experiences with people, especially when you guide them and you're part of it, there's like
Mhm.
a connection there that's pretty incredible to see.
Yeah. Well, you get
um
to meet the real person, right? Their true
yeah,
self,
yeah.
not guarded by whatever it is, all the walls and then the guards that are standing at the walls of the fortress. You know,
Mm.
you're not meeting them, you're meeting their true self, the more vulnerable self that
and
maybe
it's
was
and it's the beautiful thing with breathwork as well, is it's such a direct route. Like if you just breathe in the way, and it will claw its way in. It's different to, so there's a lot of therapies that are take maybe a bit more time, or meditation or things like that are incredible, and I do them, but there's not that same direct path. The breath work is like taking a drug. It's like it will have an effect if you kind of consistently, just all you have to do is breathe, and
Mhm.
it changes your physiology, and it changes your nervous system, and opens up stuff that will kind of dive into all those corners that you don't know are there. And that's what's so powerful, is like it's just people have no expectations and they have these profound experiences, and it's amazing to see.
I love that you mentioned it's like a drug, like it has that effect, right? You
Mm,
do something and it actually physiologically, emotionally,
mm,
mentally, we could even say spiritually shifts you, changes
mm,
you, releases things, like has an action in your
mm,
body. And I know that, and I've experienced this through breath work, that you can even reach psychedelic states, you know,
mm,
hallucinogenic states through it, by, uh, just by the very nature of breathing, which, you know,
mm.
yes, it's simple, it's autonomic, we all do it. But I think what's so complex about it is that because it's automatic for us, we're not thinking about we've, how our breath has changed or has configured to the trauma in our life.
Yeah,
And the breath is so intelligent that it actually will protect you, you know, at
yeah,
times
for
when you
sure.
needed that
I mean,
protection. And so it sets your body up in that way to be protected. But the problem is that when you don't need that protection anymore, you get stuck, right?
yeah, it's huge. I mean, I work in sort of two broad buckets, and the one is the sort of transformational sessions where it's, as you say, it's the kind of conscious breath work where you go quite deep, and it's much more of a somatic therapy. And that's incredible. And for many people, that's almost just a door that opens up the possibility. Um, but then almost more profoundly is some of the stuff you're talking about now, is the fact that it is this thing that is so connected with our emotions and the way we feel and the way we go through life. And a lot of the work is actually just being aware of your breathing patterns and how that can shift you emotionally, or how you lock into things. And it's just this sort of doorway into, like, when you get into a certain state, the first thing you do is notice your breath. And then if you can shift your breath, it sort of shifts your state enough to then maybe examine something else. And it just becomes this sort of bottom of the pyramid that opens up to all these other ways, but it's the sort of doorway. And I think a lot of that is just simply getting people to breathe properly and be aware of, like, where they're holding it. There's so many people I work with who just can't breathe into their diaphragm. They're so chest, because everything is tight and heavy. And the minute you even just get that to open up, there's a sense of sort of space in your body that changes everything. It can really shift things. And sometimes it's that simple of just getting your body to feel more relaxed and to feel more in tune. And there's a beautiful one of my favorite exercises, and it's not even an exercise, it's just being aware of your sort of normal breath, and being aware of letting your body breathe in the way it needs to. And so taking a sort of normal breath in and taking it out, and then pausing at the bottom and not forcing the next breath, just waiting for your body to naturally take it. And when you play with that, and you get to the bottom, and you get to the bottom, and you've exhaled, and you just continue to relax into that space of just, and rather than it being a stop point that now you need to fill up again, it's just, you keep kind of relaxing your body into that, and then your body will naturally take another breath. And it's for me and for so many people, it's the first time you're consciously letting your body be intelligent,
Hmm.
not sort of overruled by your mind in so many
Right.
ways. And there's something so profound. And whenever I really get stuck or I just go back to that of just breathing out and just sitting in that and kind of relaxing into it and feeling that presence and peace there, and then letting your body take over and restart the whole thing. Um, and then it taps into the sort of whole spirituality of it and kind of what are you connecting with. And there's so many moments of once you hit that presence of like this feeling of connecting to something broader, and whether it's you, whatever your spiritual beliefs, I think there's a sense of presence there that the breath can bring that is such a simple way for a lot of people.
What was that like for you the first time you connected into that feeling of, oh, I'm connecting into this wider field, or God or source consciousness, and whatever definition you have? What was that like for you?
I mean, it's an interesting question because I've spent so much of my life exploring that in some ways. I've meditated for a long time, not always consistently, but it's always been a
Mm.
sort of practice there. Um, and I've gone down the sort of psychedelics route for a long time, and I'm very fascinated by consciousness. And so some of those spaces I've sort of tapped into in terms of connecting to something broader. I
Mhm.
think with breathwork in particular, and maybe some of the sort of modalities I'm exploring now, is it's less this profound sense of connecting to something broader, and it's more a sense of really connecting to myself, if that makes sense. And I think that there's a sense of like for the first time in my life of really trusting my body and not having to understand it, and not having to understand everything through logic in my mind. And I think that then leads to sort of a word I've been sitting with a lot over the past while is just faith. And I think
Yeah.
as someone who's always tried to kind of crowbar reality to the way I needed it, almost always unsuccessfully, of like clinging to these outcomes that I needed and try to use my intellect to force it and to scheme and to manipulate it, shifting to a space of just trusting, getting into my body and trusting that, and then having kind of faith that things are the way they need to be, and working with that is like, even this language I'm using is language not that long ago that I would have laughed at myself for. And I think that's been such a profound shift of like, as
Yeah.
someone who thought they were relatively open to, I don't know, spirituality and sort of a lot of, I definitely wasn't closed off and unaware of this stuff. I've explored a lot of it, but for the first time, it makes sense in a very profound way. And I think part of that is the fact that I've stopped trying to understand it, and I've stopped trying to use logic, and I've just accepted that there's an intelligence beyond
Hmm.
me, and I can access it just through presence. And that presence comes about through connecting with your body and
Yeah.
removing the logic of it.
Completely. And, I've experienced the same thing of where, been very analytical, academic, ego mind focused, and wanting to understand and figure it out, and do that through logic or through the mind, and ignoring the body to the point of like
Mm,
self-destructive behaviors, ignoring
mm,
the body. Even as I was exploring, uh, esoteric subject matter and spiritual subject matter and things that were tied to emotional understanding. Psychology is a great example of that. Like psychology, the whole study is interesting, right? You're studying the psyche, which is just this one sliver of our
yeah,
being. But we tend to rely on this as being, oh, the way to understand the self, and
yeah,
forget the body intelligence and our gut and our intuition, and the gut brain, and then of course our heart, and the resonance of our heart, and what that teaches us and connects us to, and is so much more intelligent really than our
mm,
mind, as far as guiding us and leading us to the right things, and opening us up to life in a way that your mind
mm,
just can't do it on its own. So it's
yeah,
this, what you're describing to me is, just describing. one, partly my journey, but also I think the journey of a lot of people who are finding their wholeness, where you enter into a place finally where connection to God or something outside of us, source consciousness, I like to call it the energy of all that is, like connecting to that comes through self. It doesn't come through a searching out here,
Hmm.
whether intellectual or even spiritual, that transcendent kind of searching. It comes through becoming whole or
Hmm.
realizing that wholeness. And then you're just in resonance with it. That's at least the experience I've had. Like it's no longer about that searching. You just
Yeah.
come into resonance with it and you're like, whoa, oh, I don't need to know it or find it even because
Yeah.
it's right here.
Yeah. I think to me it goes back to that idea of faith, and I think
Yeah.
realizing that so much of the sort of suffering that I think everyone experiences,
Mm,
whatever the source of it, comes down to this idea of not feeling safe.
mhm.
There's your whatever your sort of individual psychology or stuff that caused it. We all have certain things that have conditioned us to react to the world in certain ways that really is ultimately a search to feel safe. And relationship is often that. It's connecting to someone and then feeling like that's your safe space. And so when that gets taken away, there's all the stuff that comes up, and I'm not going to be okay in the world. And we're not used to just having faith that it will be okay. Like our minds are conditioned to make us survive, and that means looking out for all the danger and all the things that could go wrong. And if we use our minds to constantly sort of map out the world, they're gonna err on the side of where are all the potholes, like where are all the things I
Right.
could fall into, and they're not
Danger,
necessarily
danger, danger.
focused. Yeah, we're not necessarily focused on like, actually maybe the future is going to be fucking amazing. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear on here.
Yeah, do it.
Maybe the future is going to be amazing. Like there's as much chance that your things are going to fall apart. In fact, if you've been okay your whole life up until this point, no matter what happened, you're still here, you're still breathing, things are okay. There's no reason that's not going to continue. And I think that's something I constantly try and go back to when I get in those moments of like stressed about something in particular. If I really step back and look at it, it's this sense of actually, it's just me worrying that in the future, I'm not going to be okay. And
Hmm.
then looking back, there's psychology, and I think all the mental stuff is still useful because we still live in these meat computers that have programming, and it's useful to understand that programming, and it's useful to kind of untangle that and maybe mess with the source code. And but really, if you can get to a point, no matter what it takes, of profoundly understanding that you are safe right now and you will be safe, a lot of that anxiety goes away, and that clinging to the things that you think you need to keep you safe goes away, because that's where the suffering is. It's thinking you need all these things, whether it's other people, whether it's finances or work or whatever the things might be, or your identity in the world.
Hmm.
And the more we cling to that stuff, is the more it can be taken away, and there's fear in that. It's not a
Yeah.
sense of just showing up in the world. And if we can get to a point of just feeling profoundly safe in ourselves, a lot of that goes away. And I think connecting with your body is that route. It's moving
Hmm.
out of your mind and using it for all that it's useful for. It's an incredible thing to use, and by
Yeah.
no means saying you should shift out of your brain. It's the best thing we have going. But
And the
if you
brain
can
is
connect
part
to
of
your
the
body,
body, right? I mean, and
yes.
that's the whole thing. There is no separation. So I think that oftentimes we try to, create this duality between mind body, but
Hmm.
our mind is our part of our body, but the
Hmm.
mind can tend to take over the sensations of
Yeah.
the body, right? And so then it trumps the body,
Yeah.
where we have to then start remembering the body, but the mind body is one. And when we get that, I think that
Yeah.
true integration of those the incredible intelligence and sensation and experience of all of it together is where the magic starts happening
Hmm.
rather than like closing off some aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
If you can get to that point, and it's a constant sort of practice to do that, because I think we live in a world that's so mind focused. So it's
Yeah.
trying to
Big
reconnect.
time.
I have the stat that I saw and repeat quite often at the moment. It's that the body, well, our bodies are kind of take in 11 million bits of information per second. So all the
Mm.
sort of stimulus coming in, the air temperature and the sound and the sitting on the chair and the feeling and just taste and everything that's happening. And our minds process, or our brains process, like something like 50 bits of information per second. So if we're filtering everything through our brains, it's a sliver of actually what's coming in. And if you
Mhm.
can shift the focus on some of that stuff, it's understanding that the thing that you're processing here is not reality. It's this micro portion of reality that your particular programming and situation right now and experience and all that is deciding is the most relevant thing. And we can shift what is relevant. We can shift it. And if we can get out of that for a second and reconnect with this, we can sort of shift what comes up and what's allowed to be processed. And that can be really profound.
Yeah. And I love what you said, what comes up, because our body is not just a receiver of information from our brain, right? And then it just like
Mm,
animates our body, but our body is a
mm,
receiver of information for the brain to
mm.
process. And it goes all both ways to have um, all those channels open
Yeah.
rather than like a
Yeah.
top down type of processing.
Yeah, there's so much there. It's a constant journey, and
Yeah.
and I mean, there's so many modalities, I suppose, and there's so many ways of getting to this. But it is a sense of surrender, I think, is the word. It's really allowing
Ultimately,
yourself to kind
yes.
of trust in it and let go. And I think, as someone who wasn't very good at that for a long time, it's been a big journey, and it still is. It's a
Yeah.
constant
Right.
thing, and I
That's
get
why they
shifted out of it very often, and I have to get back there. But I sort of, once that door's open, all of this stuff we're talking about, there's an awareness of it, and you're always able to kind of get back there and work with it.
do you feel like at this stage of your life that you'll never go back? You'll never like that you will keep the door
Yeah,
open?
I'm sure I will. I mean, I'm sure I will. As I like, it's a constant practice, and I think when things are good, it's very easy to slip out of it. So that's when the practice is the most. But we tend to dive into these things when we need them, and then forget them when we don't, and then it's sort of so. I mean, that's part of the journey, isn't it? Is
Mhm.
you get to play this game of sort of thinking you're I heard this years ago as a quote of something like human beings are incomplete things that constantly believe we're complete.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing. We always think we sort of know it all now, but and then we look down the road and you're like, oh, I was such an idiot 2 years ago. I was such an idiot 5 years ago. But at each of those points, I thought I had it all figured out. And part of it is getting to a point where you accept that you actually don't and probably never will. So,
Mhm.
yeah, there's no going back in some ways, I suppose, just in the sense of like the awareness of. I think the biggest awareness for me was how shut off I was in many ways, and I think that led to some negative behaviors, and as I say, kind of a lot of that was quite hard to work through.
Yeah.
So I hope, if nothing else, this period of my life has humbled me enough to remember that
Mhm.
I don't know, and that I need to listen more and constantly be aware more. So we'll see. Well,
I know, right?
maybe
Oh, it's
not.
a wait and
Yeah,
see kind of game.
yeah, yeah.
Are you someone who believes that you'll come back, that you're a reincarnated soul, or that this is
Oh,
it?
it's interesting. This is all stuff I'm recently playing into. Yeah, I feel like I like to believe that. I think I've dived much more down that side. Um, it makes sense to me in a way that I have never really thought about before. It's not something I've given a lot of thought to. I think I've always believed in a greater consciousness and whatever that means. But I think the idea of reincarnation, um, is sitting better at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I have these conversations with friends. I have friends who are very religious in all sorts of different ways. So it's interesting exploring the way sort of different people see these things. I like it from the sense of the idea that we're here to work through stuff. And there's a sense of kind of peace in that for me, of like, it's all just lessons and it's all a curriculum we get to go through. And the really shit stuff and the really great stuff and all of it is just this great learning experience, and it's necessary. And I think there's whether it's true or not, I feel like that belief makes my experience of the world better.
Mm-hmm.
And who's to know? I'll find out one day when I die. I think there's definitely a sense of I right now in this moment don't have a fear of death in maybe the same way I've had in the past,
Mm-hmm.
because I have sort of faith that there's something beyond that in whatever sense. Um,
It's
so who
interesting.
knows? Yeah.
Yeah, right. I know. I can say, oh, none of us really know, although myself, past guests, friends of mine, people I know certainly know from the standpoint of having
Mm,
experienced
yeah.
memories, consciousness of past lives, of actually journeying,
Mm,
that their soul journeys outside. And I believe that every night we journey, every night
mm,
we dream. And that's what our dreams are, is our soul journeying through uh, consciousness and
mm,
dipping down into whether it's memory or it's future or it's just
mm,
a amalgamation of this consciousness but in a different way to show us things that we don't quite see in our waking life. And so the journeying of us outside of just this regular life that we're living, to me, says, well, there's something that's journeying. There's something that goes outside of the body or
yeah.
that is separate from
Yes.
the body. So then what's that? And then where does that go? And does that, why would that die with this body when, it's, so yeah, could it be an intelligence or an energy about us that just is here only in this lifetime and in this body? Sure. But to me, it seems so much more than that. It seems like it is connected to that vast consciousness of all that is, this energy of all that
Mm,
is. And it's just an interesting thing to explore. Like you said, whether or not it's true or not, it, I believe, allows us to live a more enriched life, a life that can help us, it can help
yeah.
us get out of just the normal human struggle, because it is, whether that's paving the way to your faith or it provides lessons for you in a way that
Yeah.
our humanness can't.
Yeah. It's such a this sort of type of belief or this form of spirituality. I think for a long time, what I um, struggled with around it was this idea of, if you really truly believe that this is all sort of, there's a pattern laid out and all the experiences in your life are what's meant to happen, and you don't really have free will in that same way that we believe, and that we this sort of, these are all the things that are going to come up that we're meant to work through and that we need to work through. um, of like, what is the point? Why not just sit on the sofa and sort of stare at the TV and do nothing all day? Like, and I think for a long time I struggled with that. Of like, well, if it's all meaningless and it's all laid out anyway, then why do you need to engage with it?
Mhm.
And accepting, again, getting out of my logical mind, accept that they're both true. It can be fully laid out, and you still have to. And it's something, even as I say it intellectually, it doesn't make sense. But there's a sense of
Yeah,
like, again, faith and just trust that actually it can both be true. And I think
I
there's been
agree. I
many
think
things that
they
have
are.
come up recently where I've stepped into that sort of non-duality of like, this and this can exist at the same time. And that's been such a big thing for me to work with and accept, that actually I don't have to define everything in these black and white terms. And
Mhm.
that's been really beautiful. And when I have stepped into those spaces, there's a sense of freedom there and a sense of peace that, like, it's so beautiful. Of
Mhm.
going, actually, it's all true. I need to
And
actively enjoy and engage and take part in this, but also there's a sense of just being part of this great cosmic thing that maybe is just a conveyor belt I'm on, and I really don't have a choice in how it plays out.
yes, but you get to choose, because if, free will and destiny, let's call it, are both true, then you
Mm,
get to choose how you experience the unfolding of your destiny, right? You
mm,
can, because I think we probably all can think of experiences or of like this, of where you try to avoid something that you have this like inkling inside, you have this like feeling inside, that whether this relationship isn't right for you, or this career isn't right for you, or you have the intuition. It's like in the back of your mind, or it's like here, a whisper inside, and yet you avoid and you
mm.
distract and you don't. But then eventually it will come and tell you,
Oh,
yeah,
it
that is
always
true, and
come.
it's
Yeah,
gonna.
that is something I fully believe in. Is that it'll keep coming back until you work through it. And
Yeah.
I have so many lessons that I've finally, I hope, taken on board over the last while, that I look back at points in my life and gone, oh, I can see
If
how
it's trying to
that
get my
happened then,
attention.
and I ignored it, and I thought,
Yeah.
even worse, I thought I'd figured it out, and I hadn't become the person I needed to be, and I hadn't worked through that, and yeah, I think it'll keep slapping you in the face until you wake up. Yeah,
Yes, exactly. So
which again has led me to this amazing space of the idea that all the negative stuff that we try and resist is really great lessons we have to learn.
yeah.
And I think being able to reframe some of that. And again, it's not easy. I'm by no means claiming it. You just go like, well, this is the lesson I need to learn. It still sucks, and I will avoid the suffering at every chance I get. But when it is there and it is in your face and you can't run away,
Hmm.
kind of at least having some sense of how beautiful and necessary it is can
Hmm.
shift things.
Yes, and accepting that wholeness of life that we were talking about
Mm,
earlier, that pain is part of it, that the
mm,
experience of that, but pain can be shorter, because I believe that we prolong the pain through the resistance of going into it. So
oh
it's
yeah,
it's it's kind of like the ripping the band-aid off, metaphor. It's like we could do it
yeah,
slowly and be like, ow, 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 or we can just be like, ow, and just quick go. Still going to be painful, but it's the speed at which you get to travel through it. And
yeah,
if we're avoiding it, it's just going to be this slow and painful ripping of the band-aid off, or pulling of the band-aid off, or it's just a go, and
yeah.
it hurts and it's painful, but then you get to go out on the other side of it and get that lesson and get those gifts
Mm,
more quickly. And that's the free will part. I believe
mm,
it's just like, okay, the lesson's there for you, and it's going to keep tapping you, slapping you, until you
mm,
decide to face it.
yeah.
And our free will is whether we're stepping into it, and how vigorously, and how with how
How much
much
we're, yeah.
of our whole self we're going to go into it or not.
Yeah, it's a fun game. It's
It
all,
is.
it's all,
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is a fun game. And if you're, I think the awareness of all of the stuff, part of it is just being aware enough that you get to play it, no
Hmm.
matter how much it sucks at times. And it's not all just chaotic kind of uselessness that means nothing. There's a sort
Hmm.
of, there's intelligence out there, and there's things happening, and having some sort of trust that you're going through what you need to go through in order to evolve and to grow, is, it can make life a lot easier. It can make your experience of life a lot easier.
You brought up a great point earlier about how, the brain, the ego, is going to do everything to keep us safe, look for the potholes, look for,
Mm,
the danger signs. that's what the brain does so well. And if you're conditioned to that and your nervous system is set up for that, then obviously you're going to do that even more than
Yeah.
maybe somebody who grew up in safer spaces. And your juxtaposition, or I guess, what we've talked about today of just like giving your body the opportunity to also provide you information and give you information about the world is the beautiful part of the work you're doing now, to enter into the body so that that body can be also giving you signs. But those signs aren't, they're not going to be pothole here, danger over here.
No.
It's going to be peace here,
Yeah.
love here, like
Yeah.
gentleness there, like openness here. The body gives us those, if we allow it to, and we enter it into these in the way that you're talking about, in allowing it.
There's a term I heard and love and keep going back to is a thing called a glimmer. And I don't know where it
Yes.
comes from. We came up with it, and just this idea, and I love the idea of it. Of we sort of talk about triggers, which are these negative stimulus of things that kind of negatively affect us, and they cause us to go into kind of heightened states. But there's glimmers as well, and glimmers are positive triggers. So all these moments throughout the day that you just feel good. And part of my breathwork practice is actually really sitting with those. If I kind of take a moment and really breathe into it when I'm out, and can be the sort of sip of coffee in the morning and just the taste of it in that moment, and just, or it can be the sound of a bird or someone smiling at you, or just a text you get. There's simple things that just you get that moment where you feel good, and there's kind of the sun hitting your face. And if you stop and allow them to trigger you positively, if you start stacking those throughout your days, you can kind of constantly interrupt any negative things that are happening, and you just become much more aware and grateful for these tiny little things that are happening throughout your day and that you're experiencing, and focusing on them in that same way of what you're talking about, sort of conditioning your mind to notice that, like, all these beautiful things of how kind of great that smile was, or how beautiful the sun feels, or how like good the food smells, or whatever it might be, and sitting and kind of taking a moment and just like absorbing that and being present in it is a really profound thing.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. And the work that you're doing to help people reconnect to their body, which is connecting to their mind too, but in a different way, right? Where that is such a profound way to enter into everything you just talked about, the being able to notice, the being able to take something in with awe and gratitude,
Yeah.
and be able to breathe it into your body. I mean, there's a lot of metaphor around that, but being able to
Yeah.
breathe in and experience rather than
Yeah.
just like take it in, through your brain computer. You're like taking it in through all your cells, like through,
Yeah.
and it's entering in a deeper, different way. So how can people find you and connect with you? I know you're in New York, but are you offering breathwork sessions online? Can
Yeah, I
people?
do kind of one-on-one coaching. So as I say, it's a mixture that's very bespoke depending on where people are at or what they need. And that's great. Obviously, that's a really good way if anyone's interested. You can, I think the easiest way is through my Instagram. There's links to everything on there.
Awesome.
And then I run classes. I'm starting to do more in New York. So also through my Instagram, I update stuff on there. Yeah, so those are the two main ways at the moment. And then I sort of put out content, and I have a newsletter and all that sort of stuff. And Instagram is the
Starting point.
distribution point. So if you go on there,
Yeah.
you can click through and see everything. And yeah, if anyone's interested in any way, please message me. This stuff has been profound in my life. It kind of constantly is. I love doing it. It's a whole journey, and I love talking about it. So if you're interested just to find out more or to talk about anything, please reach out. Like open anytime.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on your journey, the continuing journey as it is, right? That you're on, that we're all on. I appreciate your candidness and your vulnerability, talking about, you know, what you've been through recently and how that's led you to now, not coming in as, oh yeah, you know, this is how it's always been, and I've always had
Mm,
this knowledge. But, you know, for people to really see that knowledge is gained through
mm,
experience, and it's gained through not just the good stuff, but the bad
yeah,
stuff, or what
yeah,
is the painful stuff too.
yeah, yeah. And I would say that to anyone, if there's one thing I can say, it's knowing that you don't know, and you
Mm,
just have no idea what's around the corner, and that the most painful stuff, if you open yourself up to it, there's gold in there. And it's the sort of, you can turn that into a much better life. So
yeah.
wherever point you're at now, and people are in some pretty bad points, it's hard and it's real, but there's always opportunity there.
Hmm.
So there are ways of shifting, as we talk about this meat computer, and allowing it to experience the world in a different way. So
Hmm.
yeah, keep your mind
Amazing.
open.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for sharing all your time and insights with our audience. This is amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, it's great.